IUCN World Conservation Congress, what does it mean for Europe? First of all, I would like to greatly thank our hosts, the members of the European Parliament, Ms. Mia-Petra Kampula-Natri and also Ms. Catherine Chabot for co-hosting this event with IUCN and also with the European Parliament's Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development. My name is Hilde Eggermont. I'm the coordinator of the Belgian Biodiversity Platform and also the chair of the European Biodiversity Partnership, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we kick off, maybe just a couple of housekeeping rules. There is no chat box, but throughout the session you can post questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to answer as many as possible in the Q&A session with our speakers that is planned towards the end of the event. And now when submitting your questions, it is important that you all use the all panelist option, otherwise they might get lost. And also within your question, please make sure that you note the speaker to whom your question is addressed so that I can ensure an efficient and fruitful discussion. I also hope that most of you are familiar with Slido because as a warm-up, I would like to ask you a question. So I will ask the people to put on the slides. So the question I would like to ask to all of you is what words come to mind when you think of the IUCN World Conservation Congress? And to answer this question, you can either just go through using the QR code, or you can just go to www.slido.com and then you use the event code hashtag 448580. So I will give you a few moments to do that. And so when you have entered into the Slido, you should see the question, what words come to mind when you think of the IUCN World Conservation Congress, and you can just type and then we'll see what comes up. It's already a good start, inspiring. Biodiversity is popping up. Networking, passion, also nice. Collaboration, comprehensive. Capacity building, multilateralism, nature-based solutions, collaboration, targets as well, climate change, restoration. Okay, that's really nice. It's really wonderful to see such a wide area of answers, and maybe our speakers will also refer to some of these in their feedbacks. I see some more popping up. Species conservation, the one plan approach. Yeah, that's great. Okay, we do the exercise at the end of the event. So for now, I would like to give the floor to our hosts, the members of the European Parliament, for a few welcome words. And I will first invite Ms. Mia-Petra Kampula-Natri to welcome the participants, and then she will be followed by Ms. Catherine Chabot. So Ms. Mia-Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for cooperation of organizing this important seminar. The EP Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, a co-chair for that. It's an honor always to have a commissioner in our event, and then at this time also the IUCN from the very high level, whereas we always cooperate with your European section. And also having here the youth and business and everything on board, it's an honor. It's an importance underlining statement that this needs everyone on board. I must say that these days are difficult and hard as we have a war in the European continent, but there is no crisis that would us let forget the very basics of our global inhabitants, that we have a globe where we can live. And the more knowledge we have, I would say again, we know that the nature plays a bigger role than we expected or we were considering in the past decades. But I recently today spoke also to the classes of the informal learning, and it was a group of pensionists. and we were debating the climate change, and they were saying, yes, youth, young generation, they don't eager anymore for the combustion engines in the cars. They don't know any more wish to have this and that. They are ready for the action on the climate change needed. But at the same time, I reminded that actually it's not long ago that the people really knew how to live in balance with the nature. So it is my grandmother who had the first plastic bags. He collected them and washed them and used until they were very bad shape. And he lived 9 years with me. And all that 9 years, she had the same dress. It was beautiful. It was dear even to me to see it in the pictures nowadays. So also when it comes to the nature and conservation of the nature, people knew before something that we forget for the decades, and now I think the relation is to be built back with the latest scientific knowledge, and this is what I wait for this seminar also, to have the greetings from the IUCN World Conservation Congress, the message you want to deliver to Europe for policymakers here, but as we saw, for business, for young, for everyone. I will conclude here that my roots come from Same, from very north, and I never know that much of the religions or the way of living there. But I know a little, and it's remarkable, and I feel very sensitive for the nature, because they had the holy stone, holy piece of land, holy pieces of nature. And that message I carry on with me, that we have this big work to do, that we only have this one globe with the amazing nice pictures, but it needs to be more than nice pictures on the brochures or the movies. We have to learn to live with that. So with these remarks, I'm happy to have an MEP colleague here with me, and she will also greet you for a few minutes. Thanks. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and an expertise. It's a remarkable, good panel we will have.
Thank you, Ms. Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, and for also highlighting the central role of science and of indigenous people and local communities when it comes to nature conservation. So, Ms. Catherine Chabot, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Hilde, and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the Intergroup on Climate, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development for organizing this event. And I'm honored to co-chair this event with you, my colleague Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri. I would also like to greet all the speakers, starting with Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevicius and the General Director of IUCN, Dr. Bruno Eberle, and thank all our moderator and all those who are listening and joining us today. Secondly, I would like to share with you my feeling at this painful time for the world and for Europe, that there is an imperative need to be more than ever invested, committed, and on the forefront of the challenges for the climate and biodiversity. The IPCC scientists urge us to do so, and they warned us one more time in their latest report: the health and political crisis that we are experiencing today throughout the world also have their roots in the disruptions we are experiencing. So we need to act quickly, and in my opinion, to act while taking into account the existing links between all the major issues, between climate, biodiversity, ocean pollution, food poverty, economic development, peace, etc. Everything is linked. And this is particularly true for biodiversity. Once again, I would like to remind you that we have a tool that we do not use enough to strengthen the coherence of our public policies, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. They must be the backbone of our actions. So my impressions and about the IUCN Congress, first of all, I am happy that the Nature Congress could be held I am even happier that I followed its elaboration since France applied to host it, because at that time I was delegate to the Sea and Littoral Affairs at the Ministry of Ecology. I salute the IUCN teams and all the organizers and the commitment of my country, France. We can also salute the work done to have the 148 resolutions or recommendations adopted. I know that they required a great deal of work upstream from the IUCN teams, but also from those who submitted them. I know this even better because I submitted one that was not retained. And I look forward to hearing from Mr. Oberle on the follow-up to these resolutions and on the Manifeste de Marseille. I won't go into details because you will elaborate them, but I would like to point out several commitments that are progressing. The commitment to move towards a treaty on plastics. I have often had the opportunity to testify that this is a subject that has triggered my engagement, and the IUCN has given a good momentum, taking up the recent One Ocean Summit in Brest, and followed by the commitment of Nairobi to start negotiations by 2024, which is historic. The Great Blue Wall is also a project that caught my attention. Or the indigenous global plan of action for the governance of indigenous lands, territories, waters, coastal seas, and natural resources. Other topics such as blue carbon or forests, nature-based solution, of course, which I will come back to during the first panel. Finally, I would like to tell you how important was the sequence we had re-experienced in Marseille Bay with the President of the Republic, Mr. Macron, during the sea trip with Commissioner Timmermans and Charles Michel, who were able to measure the stakes related to the sea. It is imperative that the EU resolutely turns towards the sea, but I will talk about this again in a moment in the first panel. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ms. Chabot, and also very relevant indeed to remind us about the interlinkages between all these societal challenges and the role that nature will play in solving these. And also thank you for sharing already a bit of your views on the Congress and for highlighting some of the commitments that followed. So many thanks. So with this, I will move to our first panel, and I'm very honored that we have with us the European Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, Virginijus Sinkevicius, to give you some opening remarks. So I will give you the floor for some 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And of course, thank you for this invitation. As you know, the world has changed irrevocably since last week. The Russian invasion is a seismic event, the most significant geopolitical development in recent European history. But while our minds and agendas are very much focused on the atrocious war, we must continue addressing the existential crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And the greatest scientists in the world constantly underline the need for urgent action, calling on political leaders to take the responsibility. Today's debate is a good chance to contribute to that. The IUCN Congress adopted 137 regulations and recommendations, and many are highly relevant for our work. They are vital for the implementation of EU biodiversity strategy and for the preparation of the new global biodiversity framework. And I can see 3 areas in particular where these resolutions will be extremely useful, so I'll take a look at them in turn. The first is the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which needs to be agreed at COP15, and its adoption has been postponed for too long, and this is now more urgent than ever. It's time to stop the extinction of species and start the process of restoration. Action on nature needs to go hand in hand with action on the climate. And as we read in the most recent report from the IPCC, the links between protecting and restoring ecosystems and addressing climate change are clearer than ever before. The second area is nature restoration, and the Commission's upcoming proposal for regulation that we aim to adopt soon. Restoration is at the core of biodiversity strategy and of the European Green Deal. What we propose will respond to calls from the Council, the European Parliament, and many stakeholders, including IUCN, of course, for more ambition on nature restoration. Our aim is to restore degraded ecosystems across the EU. We concentrate on ecosystems with the highest potential to sequester carbon and those best suited to prevent and reduce the impact of natural disasters. We want to set targets and obligations for those specific ecosystems, and perhaps most importantly, this regulation will allow the EU to act quickly with measurable results by 2030. With this new instrument, we will show that we are acting at home and that we are delivering the change we hope to see in new global biodiversity framework. The third area where IUCN resolutions can be of particular relevance to our work is deforestation. Back in 2020, the IUCN World Conservation Congress passed 2 resolutions on the fight against deforestation. We listened and we acted. In November last year, we presented a legislative proposal to tackle deforestation. When adopted, it will mark a decisive turning point in the global fight against both deforestation and forest degradation. Europe does have a big responsibility here. We are aware of our consumption of commodities grown on deforested land. And of course, that also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss. And this proposal responds to that responsibility. But it also places the EU at the forefront of global efforts to fight deforestation and forest degradation. Building on FAO definitions, it addresses for the first time illegal and legal deforestation, and it obliges companies to clean up their supply chains and to get rid of products and commodities associated with deforestation. The strict traceability requirements will increase transparency, linking commodities to the areas where they are produced, and this proposal acknowledges efforts expected from many producer countries and therefore also includes support for them. What we have, in short, is, I believe, the right instrument to lead a global transition towards sustainable agriculture supply chains. So, dear colleagues, the world has changed. We also need to change. We need to deliver more security for the future. And when we set up our biodiversity protection, when we get the world on board to do the same, we're going in the right direction. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sinkevicius. And yeah, also interesting to hear how some of the IUCN resolutions are being taken up in legislative framework, and we look very much forward to see the launch of the new EU nature restoration law later this month. So now I would like to invite the Director General of IUCN, Mr. Bruno Oberle, for a few words.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, members of Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. If you want to know what, in my mind, the IUCN World Conservation Congress in Marseille did for Europe, the answer is simple. It breathed new life into nature conservation in the region and globally. The Congress has galvanized conservation across the continent. But also the IUCN Congress gave a global platform for European leadership in this sector. This is why, even though the Congress was 6 months ago, it felt only like yesterday when we were in Marseille all together. On providing a global platform, European leaders, such as the Executive Vice President Timmermans, the Commissioner Sinkevicius, Christine Lagarde, and Emmanuel Macron, stood in front of 1,500 members from all countries around the world. In front of this worldwide audience, they reinforced commitments to a sustainable agricultural transition, to increased protected areas on land and sea, and to placing nature at the heart of their decision making. They emphasized that our economies are dependent on biodiversity and on the resilience biodiversity is bringing to us. And yes, this is important for Europe, because of how it will impact the life of the millions of people that lives on this continent. But it also provides an international example to follow. And secondly, the IUCN Congress galvanized continent-wide conservation. Our Congress was the first global environmental gathering to take place since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the motivation is provided after years of lockdown and border closures cannot be overstated. Marseille IUCN members fully supported European action on protecting old growth and primary forests, on increasing nature-based solutions, and on expanding and updating the IUCN European Land List. These outcomes have bolstered environmental action in Europe and reinforced commitment already laid out in the European Green Deal. And of course, all the examples above, particularly the European Green Deal, were socialized on the global stage that was the IUCN Congress. Today's event will share more on how Congress result will bolster conservation in Europe. On this continent, we have 58 states and government agency members. We have 327 non-governmental members. We have one indigenous people organization member. By providing a space for all these organizations and members to come together and democratically set concrete action for the future, we provided a key milestone that rallied and united this broad family. Because of the IUCN Congress, Europe is now more ready to play a key role in crucial discussions, such as the preparatory CBD negotiation right now here in Geneva, and in the main discussion later on in Kunming, China. Excellencies, friends, I wish to end with a message of thanks. I thank France for hosting the Congress and allowing IUCN to return to the countries where it was founded more than 70 years ago. And I thank the European Commission and the European Parliament for the strong support and presence shown in Marseille. I thank all our European members for driving IUCN and giving us the strong mandate through the IUCN program, for supporting the European Work Plan, which is this region's contribution to the Union's global effort, for the many resolutions passed, and for the physical and virtual support in the crucial days that unfolded last September. Congress allowed us to prove IUCN's leading role in convening the global community so that we may safeguard biodiversity for sustainable development and all life on Earth. The IUCN World Conservation Congress breathed new life into nature conservation in Europe. That is exactly what we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Oberle, and also thank you for making time to join today's event during the busy CBD negotiations. You already highlighted a few key impacts of the Congress, and I'm sure that the next speakers will also add to that. And indeed, it's important to recall the unique convening power of IUCN, bringing together states, NGOs, and indigenous people organizations. So many thanks. So now I'll move to our second panel. And here I would first like to invite Mr. Alberto Arroyo-Schnell, the head of the policy and program at the IUCN Europe office in Brussels. And he will introduce the key outcomes and the impacts of the Congress for Europe. So Alberto, you can start your presentation now.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It is actually very exciting to finally have the possibility to have this discussion in Europe, although it's not the best times, as we know. It's a challenging time in Europe, but it is also, as the Commissioner was saying, not the time to forget that we have incredibly big crises related with biodiversity and climate that we need to tackle. Ultimately, we are here to try to make a better world. Well, Marseille was an incredible occasion. I like very much what Bruno was saying just a while ago, that this was the opportunity to bring new life. This was exactly what happened there. It was very intense. It was the first time we had a hybrid meeting after a long time of virtual discussions. And it was also a bridge to Kunming, which was originally planned also at that time when the things were still normal before the pandemic. And it happened exactly at the right time anyway, because Kunming is, as we know, ahead of us. If you can go to the next slide, what I have here is simply some data about the IUCN World Conservation Congress, which was held, as you know, from the 3rd to the 11th of September in Marseille. It was a hybrid event. We had over 9,000 registered participants and over 25,000 members of the general public were able to visit the exhibition. So it was a huge event. It happened in Europe, as we know, in the European Union, with a strong support from France, but also from other European countries, and of course from the European institutions. This also shows, as also Bruno was mentioning before, the leadership in environment that Europe has in the world, in particular on biodiversity. The World Conservation Congress was a great opportunity to show this leadership to the world. Remembering anyway all the time that, of course, there are still lots of things to do in Europe. We have very good policies, and in particular, I would like to highlight the Green Deal, which is a positive way forward. Now, to keep up this leadership, of course, we need to ensure that the implementation is really working. There is a lot of work to do still in Europe. One of the things that happened also in Marseille, and I would like to go now to the next slide, is that we approved the work plan for Europe, for IUCN, for the years 2021-2024. This is the implementation means of the Nature 2030 program, the IUCN program for 2030. And this was agreed among all the IUCN European members. So this is the way forward that we have decided as IUCN that we want to have for the next years. There are lots of key areas of work in this work program. I can only highlight some of the key ones, very much related, as I said before, also with the European Union Green Deal, but also going beyond. Of course, key issues such as the red list of IUCN, protected areas work, the nature-based solutions concept, but also others very important, such as agriculture, circular economy, the urban issues, and issues also related with the outermost territories, for example, the BEST project that I'm sure you are familiar with. I would like to jump also to what has been happening in Europe after the Congress. We have now developed a report that you can access also online, where you can see all the resolutions that have an impact or can have an impact or can be helpful for the European discussions, several discussions. A number of them have been mentioned by Commissioners Incavicius before, and they go beyond actually many of the areas that we can say that are more traditionally you want in terms of conservation. It's really huge, the number of resolutions, over 130 as it was mentioned before. This document is summarizing how these resolutions are joining with the European Union discussions, and also the link with some of the political discussions that happened there. We had a Marseille manifesto that is summarizing the key messages that we had from the World Conservation Congress. And we also have a number of events that were related or in parallel or happening together with Europe, with the World Conservation Congress, where we had some impacts that can be very helpful in the European discussion. I will come back to them in a moment. I am only going to summarize some of the resolutions because this is a huge task that can be especially relevant in some of the discussions that are happening or will happen very soon in the European context. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to start with the ones that were already mentioned also by Bruno in relation with the 30 by 30 target on protected areas. I'm going to read what is the name of the resolution, setting area-based conservation targets based on evidence of what nature and people need to thrive. So this resolution is calling on all IUCN constituents to support the target, the 30 by 30 target that Europe already has and is already in the current draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework. This is a very important target for IUCN and of course for all of us. And IUCN will be helping in this context all over the world, but in Europe in particular, where the target is already a target for Europe, as we have it in the European Biodiversity Strategy, it is especially relevant already. Also very timely in terms of the resolutions is the resolution on restoration, as also was mentioned before by Commissioner Incavicius. We have an upcoming legislation on restoration in Europe. And we place an important part of our efforts in the restoration work from IUCN. This resolution is especially related with the UN Decade on Restoration 2021-2030 that has just started, or we are already actually 1 year on it. So these resolutions, together with others that are related with some specific ecosystems, such as the oceans, We are clearly supporting nature restoration on large scale, and we have a strong support also for the upcoming EU Nature Restoration Plan, the legislation that was mentioned before. Other resolutions, if we can go to the next slide, are related also with one of the key issues or key issue that is now fundamental in the discussion related with biodiversity, which is agriculture. This is also a key topic for IUCN. We have an initiative also very much supported by our DG, Bruno Overle, before. He was also mentioning agriculture. This is a key priority, and we have a number of resolutions that can be very helpful in this discussion. The first one is, I'm going to read it again, transforming global food systems to sustainable land management that is aligned to the UN SDGs. And the second one, developing agroecological practices as nature-based solutions. This is one of the fundamental issues, as I said, agriculture. I was yesterday only at the Forum for the Future of Agriculture discussing about how this could look like in future with all the rest of the key actors in the agricultural sector, with farmers, with the private industry, and with environmental NGOs and many others. This is one of the roles that IUCN is playing and has been playing during the past years in relation with facilitation of discussions and convening discussions with different actors. This is going to be the crucial way to achieve these goals related with agriculture, and we will continue to do so in future. There are also other resolutions that are very relevant in this respect. I'm again going to read the titles: combating soil degradation and artificialization, and generalizing alternative practices and techniques to the use of synthetic pesticides. Again, especially relevant in Europe, considering that there is a EU mission for a soil deal for Europe on the one hand, and also there is a soil initiative that is being developed at the moment. And more important even for that, or more than more important, even adding to this, there is also a target in the European Farm to Fork Strategy to reduce the risk and the use of pesticides to 50%, which is a challenging target, and again will need the involvement of all the relevant actors. If we move ahead to the next slide, there is also very important work related with nature-based solutions, as you know. And this is a concept that has been developed many years ago and in which IUCN was very much involved to promote this kind of solutions that can be fundamental both for the climate and the biodiversity crisis. We have now an IUCN Global Nature-Based Solution Standard, and the resolution asks us, all of us, to promote the use of this standard that can be very helpful in all discussions that are related with environment. In particular, in the Horizon Europe program, there is a number of mentions of nature-based solutions, and is, as we know, a very important part of the work that is done from the European Commission, always mentioning the nature-based solutions. And now is also a special moment because we have very, very recently, actually, a new definition agreed at the UNEA on what nature-based solutions is. And this is actually very aligned with the IUCN definition, of course. So this is going to be a very helpful for the whole discussion on the European Green Deal implementation. There is also a particular resolution, a bit more regional, about how the implementation of nature-based solutions could help in the Mediterranean basin. Again, very important for Europe. If we move to the next slide, now I'm going to enter into others that are actually very much related with Europe, specifically for Europe. One that is related with old growth forest in Europe and facilitating the restoration of this forest. This is of course in line with the EU commitments and encourages actually IUCN member states in Europe to promote a legal framework in favor of the conservation and restoration of primary and old growth forest. We are having, as we mentioned several times before, new legislation upcoming at the moment in relation with restoration. So this could be the way to tackle this resolution from the European side. Also, I want to mention, and this was very much emphasized by MEP Catherine Chabot before, the resolutions related with the marine discussion. Now we are getting to the end of the negotiations of the BBGN. As you probably know, we will have it probably later on this week. So the World Conservation Congress was also key in relation with the oceans. And there is a number of resolutions that are very helpful for the protection and conservation of our marine environments. In particular, and as it's typical with IUCN, we have pioneered, again, asking for support to stopping the global plastic pollution crisis in marine environment by 2030. So now having this resolution afterwards, it has happened very, very recently. We have now a commitment to work on a global plastic treaty agreed in Nairobi only 2 weeks ago. So this is fantastic news, and again shows how IUCN can help in these debates. IUCN was also, if you remember, pioneering in relation with the CBD, with Ramsar, with CITES. This is the kind of role that we can play as global, if you want, in this case, think tanks about how the things will look like for conservation in future. And there are other resolutions that are related with very important issues related with knowledge that was mentioned also before by both MEPs that were introduced in the event today. One in relation with the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species and to ensure adequate funding for them. And by the way, no IUCN member state voted against it, so it was very much unanimous. And in Europe, this is particularly important, thinking in the needed reassessments and thinking in particular also in the upcoming midterm review of the EU biodiversity strategy, which is only 3 years ahead of us. Another fundamental resolution is related with the biodiversity financing. In Europe, we have this impressive interinstitutional agreement to have 7.5% of our budget dedicated to biodiversity by 2024 and 10% by 2026. This is something that now needs to happen, and this resolution can help to get some support and momentum to really make it happen. And now I stop with the resolutions because, as I said, there are many, many more, but let me go to other issues that also happened there, as I mentioned before, that went beyond the resolutions. There were some events that were very helpful to also advance the discussion with several important stakeholders that are also necessary or not necessary, fundamental in the discussion about how to achieve the conservation targets. The first event that I want to mention is the CEO Summit, which provided a unique opportunity for forward-thinking business leaders to engage in a dynamic dialogue with IUCN constituencies, which means a lot of very different actors again, on how we are accelerating their commitments to nature. So we have a number of multinational companies there with a combined annual turnover of $92 billion and close to 300,000 employees, who committed to restore and enhance biodiversity through nature-positive corporate strategies and actions. Very impressive. Secondly, I also want to highlight the IUCN Youth Summit, which brought young people together from around the world, all over the world, to work together for the future of people and nature. So there was a resolution adopted on the role of children and youth in nature conservation. And now with the European Commission recently launched the Green Track in collaboration with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, this can be a helpful also tool to ensure that all these things are advanced at the right speed. Well, I'm getting to the end of what I wanted to present for today. It's just, as I said, only a summary. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight that the Congress was a moment in which all sectors of society were united, where all actors were listened to. And this includes the youth and also the indigenous peoples and many others, where policymakers were paving the way forward together with scientists, business made substantial commitments, as I mentioned, and even local governments were acknowledged as an agent of change, because actually there is another resolution that I would like to highlight here to include subnational governments in IUCN membership, which is a fundamental way forward to recognize the role of these actors in the conservation action. Well, the key messages that are included in the Marseille Manifesto that I mentioned before are focusing, of course, at the time in the post-COVID recovery and the biodiversity crisis and the climate emergency. And with this, I'm really getting to the end with my next slide, which is basically just a thank you for everybody for being here today. This Congress was in Europe. Its results are very helpful for Europe. You can see it in the paper that, as I said, is available in our website. And it happened in advance to Kunming, so it's also helping the global agenda. So if we are to achieve the final vision that we have of living in harmony with nature, we must walk the talk, all of us. We have to act together. That's the way. So you will always find IUCN to help here when it comes to biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for this concise overview. And not only referring to resolutions that are of global importance, like the one on the nature-based solutions global standard, but also to those that are of specific relevance to the European context, and also indeed summarizing a few aspects from the different summits. So this will definitely set the scene for further reflections by the other panelists. And these other panelists include, first of all, we have with us Mr. Philip Tolkens from the European Commission. So Mr. Tolkens is the head of the Climate and Planetary Boundaries Unit at DG Research and Innovation. We also have Ms. Julia Carbone from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and Julia is the director of the Natural Climate Solutions Alliance. And we are also delighted to have Ms. Julia Testa in our panel, and she's the biodiversity youth representative. And then last but not least, we also have one of our hosts in the panel, Ms. Catherine Chabot, also representing Renew Europe. And Ms. Chabot, I will start with you because I understood that you may have to leave us for another event. So my question for you is, we heard that our oceans are crucial to both people and to the planet. And what are, according to you, the next steps that you would like to see happening to protect and restore our blue planet? And I also saw a question in the chat box, so maybe you may want to refer to that one as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry for the other panelists, but as you said, I've not a meeting just after in a few minutes. To answer your question, the following steps and points that seem essential to me, some which were announced at the One Ocean Summit in February in Brest. First of all, there's as I said before, and it's not only on ocean, this one, use the SDGs as the backbone of our public policies and not trying just to align to the SDGs, but use them as the backbone to have a more coherent public policies. Secondly, achieving the plastic treaty, we already speak about it, and putting biodiversity into terrestrial and marine infrastructures. I think it's a very big point that we have to accelerate. Make the Great Green Wall a strategic project for the EU. It is an agroecological project that implements the SDGs, and I was very happy to hear Alberto on this point of agroecological projects. Act urgently to preserve the Białowieża, the last primary forest, which is being destroyed by the construction of a wall between the Polish and Belarusian borders. And now on the ocean, bring marine and coastal ecosystems into the carbon market, with much greater integration of marine and coastal ecosystems into the implementation of the Green Deal, especially blue carbon ecosystems, including in the LULUCF, the sustainable carbon farming regulations, etc. We need to not only consider the forest, the terrestrial forest, but also the marine and coastal ecosystems. Make biodiversity conservation the driving force behind sustainable tourism and sustainable fisheries. There are solutions linked to carbon finance. And we must move forward on the recognition of the ocean as a global common of humanity. This moral notion that I am promoting at the global level must be included in the preamble of the future treaty on the ICs, so as to place individual and collective responsibility above the principles of sovereignty and freedom of the sea. I also suggest that the 2 marine protected areas that we want to create in Antarctica should be created within the framework of the implementation of the BBNJ, since the file remains blocked, certainly for a long time, by the Russian and Chinese vetoes within CAMELAR. In terms of ocean governance, and it will be my final points, improve European governance of the sea and create an ocean project team within the Commission and a real committee on the ocean and maritime issues within the European Parliament. And finally, the UN Ocean Conference, co-hosted by the governments of Kenya and Portugal, will be held in June in Lisbon to propose science-based innovative solutions aimed at starting a new chapter of global ocean action. So it will be a great occasion to move forward in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and to implement in Europe the Starfish mission. Thank you. And I didn't see the question you were speaking about, Hilde.
Thank you. Yes, there was a question referring to whether we do enough in the context of protecting marine biodiversity in the context of the CBD negotiations, and also whether we will be able to protect 30% by 2030 in the marine environment.
Yeah. Just a word about that. We have to consider that protecting the protected ocean is not only the job of the governments, of the NGOs, but it's also the responsibility, the duty of the citizens, communities, private sector, etc., everybody. And that's why I'm trying to push the notion of the ocean as a global common, a common good of humanity, but we find the translation in English, the global common. It's just because it's because we need to make all the citizens in our planet aware that everybody is connected to the ocean, even if we are far from the ocean. So I think IUCN have a very big job, and I will push behind, and I will be a strong supporter to share all those biodiversity topics with everybody.
That's great. Many thanks.
Merci.
Thanks for joining us.
Et merci beaucoup, et pardon de prendre la place des autres speakers. Merci.
Non, pas de problème. Merci beaucoup. And then I have a question that I will ask to the other speakers. It will be the same question, so I will start with the same question for all of you, and would like to ask you to answer in 2 minutes, if that's possible. And it's a question that we have also asked previously to a few of you. What are the impressions of the Congress, and also the outcomes for Europe, and what does it mean for your organization? And I will start with you, Mr. Tolkens.
Thank you very much, Hilde. I'll be quick to save you time. So, of course, the Congress was much needed in person. That was also important. It was needed for advancing an ambitious and global biodiversity framework. And we particularly appreciated the focus on knowledge, learning, innovation, and technology. Coming from DG Research and Innovation, this is no surprise to you. In the manifesto from Marseille, this manifesto pointed out the need for evidence-based targets for halting biodiversity loss and for protecting our planet, both on land and in this ocean. The evidence-based, the science-based approach is crucial, because none of the environmental policies that we need to pursue can rely on other better knowledge than what comes from science. It all came from there, and this needs to be still the main route to progress and to monitor whether we deliver on the targets. Also, the resolutions, the outcomes of the World Congress refer to removing barriers to finding finance and business innovation, and to promote investments in nature. So the business component is very important and needs to be emphasized again and again. We still face difficulties in funding the deployment of nature-based solutions. I'll come back to that. And the business plays a big role in that. Also, the outcome of the Congress insisted on the transition to nature-positive economy. As you know, in the EU, we are implementing the Green Deal, and therefore we need to transform the economic model that we have. President von der Leyen said that the Green Deal is the new growth model of the EU. Now we need to do this in practice, and it's not straightforward. And a lot of research innovation, but also change in the mindset of economists need to happen to make sure that we can combine the aspiration for prosperity, addressing inequalities, and protect nature as it should. Of course, Congress, the outcome of the Congress insisted on the need to understand how ecosystems are being transformed because of climate change and other drivers, and because also of the impacts of human activities. It goes both ways. The interaction between nature and human beings need to be further understood, but this is no reason to delay action, of course. We know enough to act way enough, and we need to act faster and more forcefully. Our job in the Commission, in the research department, is, of course, to prepare options and propose them to policymakers. And that's what we do in Horizon Europe, or Research Innovation Program. We are contributing to the implementation of the EU and the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we provide the solutions that should be implemented everywhere in Europe, upon, of course, the local geographic and conditions and nature conditions. And that's why we promote very forcefully nature-based solutions as efficient and effective solutions that are offered to the world beyond the technology solutions that are well known since a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. I will continue with Julia Carbone. Maybe you also want to add a few words here.
Yes, thank you very much, Hilde. Thank you all for the invitation. Philippe, great words. I'd like to follow up with you about, how business can definitely play a key role in implementing nature-based solutions. I'm really delighted to represent the World Business Council for Sustainable Development today. As you know, we convene more than 200 companies that really have at heart sustainable development, and nature is one of the key priorities. WBCSD is not that young, has been established in 1995, really at the beginning of this idea of business having a role in sustainable development. And but WBCSD is one of the organizations that, actually business organization, that has been at Congress pretty much, in the past 4 or 5 editions. For sure, they were there in Barcelona, they were there in Jeju, they were there in Honolulu, and recently in Marseille. In the last 2 congresses, actually, we were members, and we were proud to be there also during the members' assembly and be able to contribute to the conversation in defining resolutions and recommendations. It's now a personal, I was at IUCN until 6 months ago, and I have been to the same congresses, and I have seen an incredible evolution on how the Congress and how the business is part of the Congress and has been part of the conversation. And I have to say, in Marseille, every single event I attended, we had a real good, representation of all the key stakeholders. Business were there, governments were there, NGOs, civil society, people from the street. Everybody was part of the conversation. And this is really the power of IUCN. It's really the capacity of IUCN of convening these multi-stakeholder conversations that are so important to push forward the action. Now, we are very proud to be members, and as good members, we will look into all the resolutions that are relevant for business, and we'll keep track. I know the trick, how to keep track, and we will definitely do that. And I think that's certainly one way to demonstrate that business contributes. But I think the biggest way is to really tell you that our program of work is structured around 3 imperatives, and one of them is nature action. And it's really about integrating nature in all the different sectors that we are operating and all what we call pathways. And it's really making nature at the, at heart of what business is doing. Let me tell you, for us, we are a global organization, but I was just checking, 46% of our membership is actually European. So we have certainly, an important presence here. Collaboration with the European institutions is really important for us. And I think, we bring leadership in terms of the businesses that, a lot of the new ideas have been elaborated in the, within WBCSD, and we would love to collaborate more with the Commission and the other institutions to really create this pole of innovation in Europe for business and nature.
Many thanks. And it's also great to have you as representing an IUCN member and speaking with passion about the role and the impact that the Union has on nature conservation. So many thanks. And then we have also our biodiversity youth representative. So I'll give the floor to Julia Testa.
Yes, so I want to start off by thanking very much the organizers and the host of this event for providing this space for discussion. It's really an honor for me to be here and to be among such great speakers. And just as a reference to the two main youth organizations I will mention throughout the discussion, being a youth representative, I currently am the biodiversity coordinator of Generation Climate Europe, which is the largest coalition of youth-led networks on climate and environmental issues at the EU level. And I'm also a member of the policy working group of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network Europe, which is the European chapter of the youth constituency of the CBD. So to answer your question, luckily neither of the two organizations that I'm an active part of had the capacity to send an official delegation. But from the outcome and the resolutions, it's clear that biodiversity has been touched upon through many different cross-cutting but interlinked issues. And this is definitely the right approach to proceed towards conservation in order to reach a long-term and a profound effectiveness. Coming down to the European context and the IUCN Europe work plan specifically, the priorities that were set forward align with most of the issues that the European youth has been calling for, and the work of the EU youth organizations prove it. Generation Climate Europe specifically advocates for the integration of biodiversity across all the sectors, from agriculture to urban development. And Given Europe has just released 2 weeks ago their last work, which is the Destination 2030 booklet. This booklet contains 10 policy briefs on topics related to biodiversity, which are freshwater, ecosystem restoration, nature-based solution, agriculture, gender, education, urban ecosystems, renewable energy, trade, and environmental economics. So yes, Given Europe is based in Europe, and we used the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030 as the backbone of our analysis. But it's equally important was for any EU youth organization working around the environmental topics to be aligned and to be updated to what is being discussed at the global level in organizations such as the IUCN and the relative events like the Congress. So we really welcome the key points that were discussed, and we hope it was really an opportunity to set in motion policies for transformative change and urgent action. Thank you.
Many thanks, Julia. And also, wonderful to hear about the engagement of youth and all these very concrete activities that you're engaged with. So, so many thanks. I think I still have, around 15 minutes, so I'll go back to Mr. Tolkens. And I will ask you how research and innovation can support the upscaling of the implementation of nature-based solutions. You already mentioned briefly about this, and also what are the mechanisms to finance and also the partnerships that are foreseen.
Okay, yes, you probably know that nature-based solutions are instrumental to reach the ambitious climate and biodiversity targets that we have in the Green Deal. But the role of research innovation is to anticipate this need. And so this is exactly what we did. The European Union made nature-based solutions one of its priorities in Horizon 2020, the former research program before the current one called Horizon Europe. And the investment was of about 240 million euros in 28 projects. That had a leverage effect also on other investments and created jobs, by the way, as well. So these projects are meant to show that the solutions developed are mature for deployment at much broader scale, because this is what is needed. The projects actually can show they have been testing and showcasing the benefits of nature-based solutions in more than 70 cities in the EU and beyond. They are also collecting and disseminating EU-wide evidence on the cost effectiveness and the efficiency of those solutions. This is important, and I want to encourage everyone to have a look at the outcome of these projects so that the knowledge can be transferred and replicated elsewhere. Since 2016, therefore, the EU became a global leader in integrating nature-based solutions in different policies. This is good, but it's not enough. We all know that. NBS are accelerators of the green transition through the Green Deal, but also they are supporting within the Green Deal the EU biodiversity strategy, the climate adaptation strategy, the climate mitigation targets for 2030 and beyond, as well as even the new European Bauhaus. NBS offered, and that's one of their great strengths, is they offer systemic solutions. Horizon Europe will keep up the pace of past efforts, and we will deliver and scale up innovative nature-based solutions, addressing the policy needs and helping to deliver on the Green Deal, and also in helping on the monitoring on progress in the Green Deal. This is an important component. At the global level, so that was for the EU, at the global level, we also support and promote NBS. The discussion is not that easy because the concept itself of nature-based solution is not well or is not understood in the same way everywhere in the world. As a representative of the EU in the focal point in the IPCC, we experienced this recently in the adoption of the Working Group 2 report, where the mere notion of NBS was discussed at length. And fortunately, the agreement that took place in the recent United Nations Environmental Big Congress, that was helpful, because we need at least to make sure that globally nature-based solutions are recognized as solutions that are serving humanity in its improving its relation with nature. So this is what we did, and that's what we'll continue to do forcefully to serve several policy streams in the EU. But for that, we need a big support from investors and business, as I said before, and I'll be happy to expand on this if there's a further question. And I can come back to the partnership, but maybe I should do that later because I spoke already long.
Thank you. And I think personally that it's a huge step forward to see that biodiversity is so prominently featuring in the European research and innovation, and that it's really at the heart also of Horizon Europe, and then also feeding into these policy processes like the IPBES and the IPCC. So thank you. So then I will continue, and I will have a question for Julia Carbone. So as was also mentioned, the Congress encouraged the private sector to invest in nature, and also to promote a transition to a nature-positive economy. So my question for you is, how do you see the role of the private sector in nature conservation, and the Congress, and more specifically the CEO Summit, change your views in this respect?
Okay. Well, as you said, and also Alberto mentioned, the CEO Congress actually opened the Congress this year. The CEO Summit opened the Congress in Marseille. That it was, I think, so powerful also as a message to all the community, to the conservation community, on the importance that we have to pay to business, but also business coming at the center of the conservation conversation, saying we want to be part of this, right? So I think for those who actually were there were some really inspiring stories shared by the CEOs or senior managers. We had EDF, ENGIE, Kering, Nestlé, Shell, Veolia. We had, of course, a very strong French participation, but beyond. WBCSD was, co-organizing and facilitated, and our CEO facilitated one of the sessions. And I think all of the speakers really put the strength on the role they can play, the role they should play, the urgency they have to play their role, but also the importance of working together with other stakeholders. And I think that is, we have said this many times as we conservation organization in different arena, but now I think is really the business also stepping up and say, we need policy, good policies to enable the leaders to actually have the followers, coming behind them. I think, so that to me was really where I saw the Congress as an opportunity to really strengthen this message about, all the different voices coming together. I think from a business perspective and WBCSD's perspective, clearly we say business has a role to play. I think the key role is to ensure that business understands their footprint, understands how to manage their footprint. And on biodiversity, we have the famous hierarchy. First, you really have to do everything to avoid your impact on biodiversity, then you minimize, restore, and really as a last resort, offsite. And now we have the context of the global biodiversity framework and say, how do you do all this, wanting to basically halt the loss of biodiversity by 2030 and restore biodiversity by 2050. So it is really important that the targets that a business puts for themselves also match now the global targets. And this is a really important also area space for collaboration, making sure that these targets actually talk to each other, right? Because we have so many people setting targets, business and NGOs and governments at the global level, national level. Do these targets actually talk to each other? Can we contribute to each other? So that certainly is an area for collaboration where business definitely plays a role and it takes responsibility, but it's important to collaborate. I just wanted to also say and support the call for the use and the deployment of nature-based solution in as many situations as possible. Also, WBCSD is on board for that. Clearly, we have to be careful in making sure that first we look at where business has to address its own footprint and where they can go beyond their footprint and mitigate beyond value chain, as they say now in climate change. So for example, my project is really about promoting the use of natural climate solutions, so nature-based solutions for climate, for companies that have already addressed their already have a plan to net zero and have science-based targets, but still have residual emissions on their journey to net zero because maybe they're from hard to abate sectors, to say, go beyond your decarbonization and go on beyond, above and beyond that and invest in natural climate solution because this will help climate, but very importantly, also will close the financial gap necessary to restore biodiversity. And this is a message coming by business to business. So this is also one of the incredible powerful stories that WBCSD can send is really to be a peer-to-peer message, right? We have a group of leaders talking to other leaders. There is an exchange, but there is also a lot of, inspiration that is going on. Yeah, so that's basically, I think, to say we do believe business have a role to play. From WBCSD institutional relationship, for example, we have a relationship with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. We are a knowledge partner of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and actually that was just launched for pilots yesterday. We are working with the SBT for Nature and promoting to our members to start piloting also the setting targets for nature. So not only the SBT for climate, but also the SBT for nature. And so there is a lot of work going on. Another thing I think is very important is that, as I was telling you, we have 3 imperatives that are cross-cutting to the pathway that are, we don't call them sectors work, but are pathways. So we talk about food, we talk about transport, we talk about built environment. So that means really we're trying to integrate as much as possible because we feel like we are in a state of emergency. All the issues are important and there is no more time to pick and choose. We really have to ensure that we create integration and efficiency in how business address all these issues that are all really, really important.
Many thanks. Yeah, many thanks for highlighting the role of business and also for of the science-based targets. I think it was also interesting that you mentioned that will allow also to track individual contributions of companies and also indeed the need to de-silo and to integrate. Then I will go back to the youth representative, so Julia Testa. So indeed, when talking about the future of our planet, we talk about youth and we talk about your engagement. So can you tell us a bit more about the Youth Summit and also how has the Youth Manifesto been used during the Congress and was there any follow-up so far?
Thank you very much for the question. So the IUCN Global Youth Summit was held in April 2021. It was held virtually and lasted 12 days in total. The summit was organized following the IUCN recognition of the role of youth in conservation, as it has been mentioned also by Mr. Arroyo Schnell before, and was a great step that youth organizations have welcomed. The summit was indeed led by young people, with young meaning people between 18 and 35 years old, but was open to anyone in order to facilitate the intergenerational dialogue. And it eventually welcomed more than 15,000 attendants from all over the world. It has been an opportunity to display, but also to join efforts by youth constituencies and organizations in a process that was participatory and inclusive, where the thoughts, ideas, demands, and commitments of the youth were highlighted. The activities that took places were in the form of capacity building workshops, intergenerational debates, networking sessions, awareness raising activities, and labs. For example, we at Given Europe, together with the Youth in Landscape Initiative and the Youth in Environment Europe, held a 2-day highly interactive workshop on ecosystem restoration, touching upon both the policy and the practice of ecosystem restoration. We aimed for a youth-led panel. We reached out to young professionals in the field of ecosystem restoration that are restoration practitioners, policy experts, communication experts, and also community leaders. And it had been quite a successful workshop. For the different levels of participation, the Youth Summit has indeed provided this space for exchanging views and priorities between young people, but also it proved that young people are well-informed and experienced stakeholders. There was actually a final statement that summarized the outcome of this Youth Summit. One of the main conclusions is that it's clear that youth must be involved in decision making in a meaningful way that goes beyond what it's called a tokenist participation. So where few young people are invited but not considered as actual stakeholders when it comes to decision making. In this summit, young people have also called for a transformative approach to conservation that recognizes the connection between humans and nature, emphasizing the role of indigenous and local communities, as, for example, the Sami people that were mentioned by Ms. Kompulanatri before. Another conclusion that was drawn after the summit is the importance of explicit consideration and facilitation of economic opportunities for youth, especially now that we are aware of the potential of green jobs, and the following importance of technology and also education. These ideas, which really reflect how long-term conservation success can be reached in the opinion of young people, are also encapsulated in this Youth for Nature to Stop the Same manifesto. This manifesto that Given has created with other youth constituencies, including Yango, which is for the UNFCCC what Given is for the CBD, highlights the urgency of the environmental crisis and the unsustainability of our current system and how problematic the business as usual is. Stop the Same is the motto of our Given campaign against the same, meaning the business as usual, the underlying conditions, behaviors, and assumptions that brought us to this point and therefore will not save us from the situation of biodiversity crisis and climate change or any other environmental challenge. This document includes the 12 youth priorities of the organizations and call for decision makers and leaders to, among others, recognize the planetary emergency, promote a change in values, priorities, and behaviors that are behind our business as usual, because technology and money alone cannot make miracles. We need something that tackles the systemic drivers of biodiversity loss. The manifesto calls also for effective strategies for conservation, ambitious environmental goals, inclusive governance, a rights-based approach, and responsible private sector involvement, since we just mentioned the private sector. This manifesto has been used throughout the summit and since then has been used as a tool to inform people and organizations and above all leaders and decision makers on the future that young people want. The approach that we follow in our daily work that can be considered in the whole entirety, the follow-up after the youth summit, the approach that we follow and we advocate is not limited within the climate change or the biodiversity box, but connects all young people with the common thread of the environment. And we really want to push this interconnection forward together with all the other values that I just mentioned. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And maybe before we open the floor for questions from the audience, I will maybe take two more from the panel right now. So I will go to Alberto and maybe ask you how you see the link between the Congress and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that is, as we know, currently being negotiated in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And also, how do you think the Congress can contribute to these discussions?
Thank you very much, Hilde. The Congress was always planned when the life was different before the pandemic, before the Kunming discussion, so before the discussion of the COP15. And the idea was to contribute as much as possible to all the related discussions that were going to happen in that context. So the preparation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. This includes all the discussions that we have already mentioned in relation with protected areas, with restoration, agriculture, etc. Now, the fact that the Congress happened in Europe is also very important because Europe is fundamental in the discussion, international discussion on the Global Biodiversity Framework. So this has helped now very much to gain momentum towards the COP15. Remembering also that these pandemic delays have not been very helpful. So now we have kept up the whole discussion on biodiversity thanks to this incredible moment. And as Bruno was saying before, this has been bringing new life, breathing new life on biodiversity. It has re-energized the whole environmental community. It has been incredibly important. And of course, all the resolutions that we have passed with the members of IUCN now have an important impact in the discussion on the Global Biodiversity Framework that is happening right now on the post-2020. And maybe this is a question actually that thinking in the different actors that we have in the panel at the very moment is maybe we could bring also to the others. How do you think that the discussions that happen in Kunming could help in the Global Biodiversity Framework that is being prepared at the very moment? Maybe it's too much as a question because we don't have that much time, but it's also something that could help also to understand how the others see this.
Thank you, Alberto. And I will maybe directly pass the question to one of the panelists. I don't know who wants to speak to this. Some of you already did partially, but...
Well, I'm happy to add about the role that business can play because as much as, you know, including having I think a bigger presence, I'm not sure a role, but certainly presence at Congress. It was really exciting to see, as you know, the discussions on CBD are happening right now in Geneva. And in the past 3 days, there has been a delegation of businesses really interacting directly with government delegations into a very structured approach. And this is something that is just, you know, mind-blowing to see how businesses actually organize themselves into, well, it's a community of business and NGOs together. Actually, IUCN is also part of that, is the Business for Nature, brings together 70 organizations, 1,000 companies, and they have organized themselves into having a proper dialogue with the delegation. So they have open events, they have bilateral events. Yesterday we had events only for business, in where you're asking, you know, is business interested in implementing the biodiversity framework? The entire day was focused on the how. So we had targets out there. So for example, I was facilitating target 8 on nature and climate. And we had a 3 hours discussion about, okay, what is the role of business in target 8? We talked about obviously target 15, target 18, target 1. And it is just really exciting to see how much business wants to be part of the solution. They're also bringing their own, suggestions for changes in the text. Now, the future is really having this conversation starting early on, bottom up at the national level, and having proper, delegations that are multi-stakeholder. And and it's not just having a business coming to the to the final discussion in Kunming or Geneva. Is from the beginning starting this these conversations about what is the role of business. Now, thinking about climate, which sometimes is a few steps ahead, just wanted to give you an example of what actually WBCSD has proposed as a way forward also for business engagement and business participation in delivering the climate targets, is to create a corporate determined contribution. So also putting climate squarely in the responsibility of business, and business also having a similar plan as much as the government have, and be able to account for that into the bigger picture. So maybe for CBD and the implementation actually of the global biodiversity framework, we could imagine where the equivalent for biodiversity will also actually have a very defined way for business to determine how they contribute to this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see Philippe also raising his hand, so maybe a few words from your side on the post-2020.
Yeah, well, I would like to react to Julia, just to put a bit of to spark a little bit the debate, because we may think that, oh, it's rosy, business is now going to invest, the world will go in the right direction, the youth is behind and pushing, and everything will be solved. No, the crisis is real. The science is good on climate and on biodiversity, but we still struggle with one key element: how to bring change on the ground, how to transform, and what is the economic model that will work to deliver on this. As a citizen, I watch TV like anybody else. I don't necessarily see on TV the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, but I see Business Europe. And there you see other types of industry as well. And now with the crisis in Ukraine, the war, the pressure on food systems, for instance, will be huge. Some people call already for intensifying agriculture and increasing the independence of the EU. This is an extremely complex matter, and we need to be very careful. So I just wish to invite all decision makers, also in the business, to carefully consider what science is saying this, and I include in science economic science.
Yeah.
For instance, for investments, the traditional cost-benefit analysis often discard the long term and make long-term investment problematic. How could we change this? How could we change the economic model so that the conditions are met? Of course, it's the responsibility of the authorities to set up the framework in which the business can operate in a profitable way, because business is meant to make profit as well. So all actors have a responsibility, but the thinking needs to evolve, and we have not saved the world yet. Yes.
Oh no, we are still at the beginning. We have, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I just have to say that we are not naive to think that business has changed. Well, business has been always there to, as you said, is there to deliver products and services. The question is, it is really important to consider business into a system, and I think that's what we have to implement on the ground. Because we talked about systems so much, but is how do you create that system that creates incentives for business to do it? And we often work with the leaders, the champions, but the change is not going to be made only by the champions. We have to have everybody around. So this is where you have champions, then you have to raise the bar for everybody else to come on board. And this is really the role of policymakers, consumers as well, that they have to push with their decisions. And NGOs that really have to start asking and pushing, doing the campaigns is so important. And last but not least, financial institutions. I heard, yesterday at this meeting, there were some businesses saying, if we had more pressure from financial institutions, we would move faster. So, we are all connected. It's a system. And we can't say it's only business or it's only government or it's only, we know the story. So, but how do we start testing these different models on the ground? I believe that change will happen, but we have to start in somewhere, and we can't change the world in one day. And having some examples working in Europe, which has a really healthy governance system, I think it's going to be also a great opportunity. And I'm sure we can find, really good businesses that would like also to test new models. So, happy to continue this conversation later on.
Thank you. Before we open up to the audience questions, Julia Testa, do you still want to add to what has been said, or maybe respond?
No, but I do see a question coming directly at me here in the chat. So
well, I think we can actually move now to the questions from the audience. So I will just give you the floor, and you just pick the question that is addressed to you, and feel free to respond.
so you mean like the question in the chat, or?
Yes, you can just if you see a question that you would like to respond to.
Yeah, so basically this question is asking if like is acknowledging that the youth is very active in environmental discussion through marches and petitions, but this person is also asking if there are also efforts on being more engaged on topics that are on the top of the policy agenda, such as the EU restoration law. And to answer that, I do recognize that the youth is seen mostly as a reactionary force. We are often associated with protests, marches, petitions, and so on. But the message that we would like and we try to get across is that we are much more proactive than what people think. And there is a lot of work being done by the youth at the political and legal level. The two organizations I'm part of, so both Given Europe and Generation Climate Europe, work with the goal of advocating ambitious targets and youth involvements when laws are actually being drafted. So we directly engage with institutions, especially EU institutions in this case, in order to get our perspective through. We also contribute to ESC opinions. We draft policy briefs, hold dialogues and discussions with decision makers from the Council, the Parliament, and also the Commission. We write policy papers, and since this question is mentioning the restoration law, under the coordination of Generation Climate Europe, we have created this common position towards a new EU nature restoration law. Together with other 5 major youth organizations at the EU level working on the topic. And this position paper represents more than 20 million young Europeans. And we have been and we will still continue to advocate our position throughout the creation of this law, from the proposal to the actual implementation. So this is just an example, but we do try to get as much high on the political agenda as we can.
Thank you, and I hope that also answers the question from the audience. Maybe also moving a bit to another topic, and I think it's quite timely in the context of the whole COVID. I saw a question: to what extent the Congress also dealt with the One Health approach and the linkages between biodiversity and health. So I'll pass that back to Alberto.
Yes, thank you very much. I saw the question, and actually, yes, I have good news. There is a resolution exactly dealing with this. It's the resolution 135, promoting human, animal, and environmental health and preventing pandemics through the One Health approach and by addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss. And by the way, this also joins with another question that was made before about geodiversity. I have to apologize that we only had a very short time to present the resolutions that I was presenting before. This was a summary, a very short summary. There are lots of resolutions that are very important here. The geodiversity ones are actually 2 the resolutions that are related with geodiversity, the number 74 and number 112. I think that in the context of the 30 by 30, the geodiversity can play an important role to achieve this target in Europe and also beyond. But also I would like to mention that there are a number of resolutions that, as I said, I didn't have the time, unfortunately, to mention, related with specific species, specific habitats or ecosystems, marine, rivers, grasslands, even wetlands, also with climate change, also with crime, organized crime impact on environment, very, very varied with indigenous people. So I have to really say that it was not possible to mention all of them, but of course there are lots of very relevant resolutions that are coming from this Congress.
Thank you. And on the link between biodiversity and health, we also have this new addendum to the global program that was specifically added to address these concerns. So yes, indeed, this has been quite well tackled, I would say. Then I also saw a question with regards to the role of citizens in reaching the new targets. We talk a lot about transformative change, and we know that this means substantial changes in society, in our behavior, and also in our relation with nature. But what does this mean in practice? Maybe I will ask this to Philippe. Sorry.
Easy question. That's the existential question of the moment, because as I said before, the science is really strong on climate, on biodiversity, and the scientists are struggling to understand how to trigger change. Maybe it has to do with psychology. It has to do with working with influencers or on social networks. It has, because we don't understand, the scientific community doesn't really fully understand how to trigger the mechanism that will bring the required change. Of course, we know that there's a lot of inertia in the system and that the policies are there to change the system. So we need courage in elaborating the policies, implementing them fast and forcefully. And the framework conditions need to be put right. I mean, I can take a concrete example. If I have kids of 20 years old, if I ask them to take the train, they tell me, yes, Dad, it's just 5 to 10 times more expensive. What do you do? I mean, the message for the youth, but not only the youth, for everyone, just the wrong messages. Currently, there is a price hike in the price of the cost of energy. If we provide a rebate to everybody, even those who can afford to pay more, this is the wrong signal. So the gap between what science says on what should be done and what is being practiced is actually an element that is a bit disturbing, because people don't understand. They don't try that we are serious in our policy because we take measures sometimes that are going against our objectives. So we need consistency. We need to set up a framework where all the actors, the citizens, the business, the policymakers converge towards the same objective. And we should also, in this context, address equity, the just transition, as said in the Green Deal and everywhere. So we need to really propose these systemic solutions that address the green aspects and the equality, social aspects at the same time, and be consistent in the approach. This is, in my view, a fundamental element to bring change that everybody will support, because they will feel that they are not alone to do the effort. For instance, very often we hear that the youth should help us in transitioning. No, it's the leaders who are in their 50s, probably my age, who should show the example and not tell the youth that they should study more and learn more on climate science and biodiversity science. They probably know more than the leaders who never studied this, never studied environmental economics. So there's a lot to do to bring change, and consistency towards the objective would be, in my view, fundamental to bring us where we want to go.
Thank you. I also saw Julia Carboni nodding, so maybe you want to speak to this? I think you're muted.
The importance really about having that coherent message, it goes back to we really need to have that together. And conversations about definitely is about policy measures and policy and private sector measures, and having them coordinated in a way that they create synergies, but also common messages, and going back to some common communication and understanding how we communicate things. And businesses also have a key role to play, influencing consumers. I mean, they can't do change their lives, but they can do things. They can certainly put forward different products. They can certainly attach to the product information that also defines, helps education. And there are some really good examples of businesses that actually are starting the space of communication advocacy for better use of resources. And again, is how do we promote these leaders so that others will follow and start doing that as well. But as you said, it's a shared responsibility, and also a shared responsibility in terms of generations, as of the older generation of setting the example.
Thank you. I also saw another question related to that, saying that business will only invest if the return on investment is high enough. And also there was a question asking how can we actually bring on board the smaller businesses? You already referred to the corporate determined contribution, so maybe can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so the return on investment, now, let's say that we have always to make a business case for a business to make a decision that it's, to change. But this doesn't necessarily mean that has to be an increase in profit. The business case and the business drivers to make change come from different ways. One is to access to new markets. One is preempt, new regulations. One is to, make sure that they have access to the resources, for example, and this is very clear, one of the drivers for companies, to also address climate change in their supply chain. And certainly is about, consumers and civil society support. An example, if right now we are asking companies to go beyond their science-based targets and look at what they have yet, still to address in terms of residual emissions, there is no incentive for them to do it, because science-based targets tell them to, decarbonize, and once they get to that level, they just keep doing it until they get to net zero. So what can we do to create an incentive and the incentive, it comes in very different way, for companies to be able to make a claim. Making a claim is a business, it can generate return on investment. So let's not just think about return on investment as a direct, let's say, result, but something that can be, obviously, that's at the end of the day how a business will measure if they had a success or not, but they can get there by many different ways, right? And for example, making sure that they don't have negative press, or making sure that they can access new clients. And this is where also together, civil society, organizations like WBCSD and policymakers, we need to work together and create these enabling environments for businesses to be able to do the right things in terms of nature and climate, but still being able to be in business. Because the worst thing it would be that they go out of business, and then there is, then it's a failure, because we still need the product, somebody else will come. And then we have, we will have to start again the conversation. In terms of SMEs, certainly a huge issues, because the capacity of large corporates to deal with these issues, it's incredible. I mean, now I work directly with businesses, and they have, teams of experts, scientists. I mean, and scientists are scientists. It doesn't matter if they work for business or, real scientists, that they go analyze the impact solutions, they do procurement. SMEs cannot afford to do that. Micro enterprises, they have 2 people doing everything. So we need tools and systems adapted to them to enable them to do it, because we also need them on board, because climate change and biodiversity loss is also a story of death by 1,000 cuts. So we really need also the small contributions to be aligned and to enable them to be part also of the new. It's not just to change and be part of the solution, but also be able to take advantage of the new business models, right? But some of these issues are very, very complex. Do a carbon accounting and the science-based targets. These are really complex guidelines and models, and this is where also I think policy can help by putting forward specific funds for those type of businesses, taking experience and expertise from the large businesses, and repackaging for those companies that wouldn't have the opportunity and the financial space to invest.
Thank you. I'll try 2 questions before we start to round up. There's a question that also refers to, how can we make the transition affordable? How can we make sure that countries do a fair share in reaching the targets? I think a lot of the discussion on the post-2020 will indeed come back to research mobilization. And so maybe a question to Philippe, how you see that. Shouldn't the largest shoulders carry the most heavy burden, and how can we convince them to do so?
Well, yes, I intervened already a little bit on that in the just transition. It means it should be just for the individuals, but also for the different member states. If we talk about Europe and also globally, the capacities to adapt to climate change, to address the basic needs of the population need fully to be taken into account. But in the end, it will be a tough negotiation at the global level. And I think if we take the example of climate policies, the EU demonstrated that if we take the lead, as we did since 2000, the European Climate Change Program was launched. And I remember I worked in this area at the time, and the Americans were saying, oh, you're going to wreck your economy. Did we wreck our economy thanks to our climate policies, where we have met our objectives? It's good to look at the past practice, because it's not true that we have done nothing. We have not done enough, but we have done a lot. And actually, the power of business is that when they start working on an issue, they are incredibly fast in transforming society. So if the business case is there, they can also reduce the cost of the transformation. You can see that in the development of renewable energy, for instance, but this can apply to other solutions. And that's why intervening on nature-based solutions, the mere fact that nature-based solutions now are seen as credible options for business is encouraging, but it needs to happen on the ground. And one way to do this in Europe is to participate to the mission on adaptation to climate change. If you Google this, you will find Horizon Europe is launching a mission on this, which are place-based activities. And NBS are really at the core of these missions. This is about deployment. It's not about doing research. It's basically rooted in research and innovation and testing the solutions on the ground. And the private sector is really welcome. The citizens are welcome as well, because the citizen engagement component is very important in this mission. If you read the documents, you will see that it's obvious. And the local authorities are directly concerned, because it's to offer them solutions, and those touch, of course, on adaptation to climate change, but address, of course, the biodiversity aspects as well, because systemic solutions are being done. But by doing this, we will learn on how to transform, and we will reduce the cost of transformation and show that these solutions can be replicated elsewhere in Europe and beyond. And that's the challenge. And this exercise is going on. Normally, it's planned until 2030. And I would encourage you to raise awareness on this, seize the opportunities. Through a Google search, you will find options for funding through Horizon Europe and other funding schemes. Sorry to do a little bit of publicity for our program. I hope you forgive me.
Yes, that's a very good forum to do this, I think. Maybe I will come back to a question that we have already put forward, but apparently, Alberto, it would be good to further elaborate a bit on that. So it's the question related to geoconservation. And so the question is, when is Europe going to take into consideration the need for the conservation and the management of this geoheritage? And also, when are we going to take that into account in planning? Is there any roadmap foreseen in relation to geoconservation?
Thank you very much. Yes, I was referring before to the resolutions that I didn't mention. Now coming to this specific issue of conservation of geodiversity. I mentioned anyway before that that's a possibility is to use also the 30 by 30 target. Speaking also about protected areas that are protecting specific issues of the nature and are very important ones, the geodiversity. So now we still have to complete in Europe and actually beyond to get to the 30%, especially in the terrestrial part. We have only 5%, but in the marine even much more. And of course, geodiversity can contribute there. And actually, there's a number of legislations at national level in the European Union that are covering actually these areas, and they can be considered protected areas. Also, actually, generally as natural monuments, etc. So that's a possibility that now it will be included or contribute to the 30 by 30. Now, in terms of the European agenda, if you want, because they mentioned very specifically in the question regulation directives, I think that's a question maybe for the Commission. I'm sorry, Philippe, to put you under the spotlight here. But I think that at the moment, what is important is to ensure that this part of our nature is also protected by all means and with any tool that we have at hand. And the 30 by 30 can pose a very good opportunity.
Thank you. Any last reactions to that before we move to the concluding remarks? I also hope that I tackled most of the questions that were raised in the chat box. If not, I sincerely apologize for that. Yes, I see Julia Testa.
Yes, so I would just like to follow up regarding a previous question that was talking about how we can enable transformative change and yeah, just promote more effectiveness. One thing that the youth really wants to see integrated, especially in the post-2020 framework, is transformative education on biodiversity. I think we can all agree that education, at some extent, is really the starting point for long-lasting change. And it needs to be an education that is holistic, that focuses on redefining the relationship that we have with nature, which shouldn't be a dichotomy, this relationship indeed. We young people at least learn about greenhouse gases since we are already in the elementary school, but the importance of biodiversity and the environment isn't that much mainstreamed. An example that it's always brought up when we are discussing this topic with other youth stakeholders is that we grow up thinking, for example, that insects are disgusting, while the role of pollinators isn't something that is normally taught and promoted since children are very young. So transformative education should be done both at the formal and non-formal level. But really, we really need to promote and facilitate intergenerational debates, indigenous and traditional knowledge, but above all, like as simple as that, make people understand why nature and biodiversity is important. So I would add the educational part to this discourse.
Great, yeah, I think this is a very valuable addition. So with this, I will close the Q&A session, and I will just invite all the speakers to maybe just say a few final words. And I will start with, so I'll take ladies first. So I will start with Julia Carbone.
Okay. I just wanted to say transformation, it's also the center of what we are doing. It's is actually the tagline of our 2050 vision, which is interesting. That is really, you know, we are talking about, we are not talking about change. We are really talking about transformation. And this is really, you know, something that, yeah, the key message. So it says, you know, it's time to transform. And it's, as you said, we really need to move forward fast. And that's, I think, one of the key messages. I think, as you know, Philippe also said, things have to happen on the ground and not at the theoretical level anymore. But I think there is another level there. It's not anymore a small project. We have to have system change and, you know, collaboration in large projects. We can't afford anymore to have little pilots here and there. And then, you know, going back to the origin of this webinar, really the role of IUCN. I think IUCN is so well placed to really have this convening role. And as I said, you know, the last time, you know, in Marseille, it was amazing to see really all parts of society coming together. And we really need that more and more, that dialogue to really have, you know, it's not bilateral anymore. We can't afford to have, you know, bilateral here, another bilateral there. We really need everybody together. Youth, as Julia said, it's so important, the future generation, in getting their support to our messages, the scientists, the NGOs, the governments, the business. IUCN is so well placed. So I'm really looking forward to the next edition of the IUCN Congress. And I really hope, you know, we will all be able actually not just to attend, Alberto, but also to be part of the design phase, because I think IUCN Congress is the members' Congress and it's everybody's Congress.
Thank you. Yeah, we all look forward to 2025, and there will be the Regional Conservation Congress in between. So there's something to look forward to. Then a few last words from Philippe.
Yeah, I would like to thank you simply, Hilde, for the event and for your role also in the partnership that you're leading, Biodiversa Plus. We count on you in the partnership with the member states to raise further the awareness, transfer the knowledge, and support the activities on biodiversity protection. I would like to praise also the role of IUCN and encourage them to go further and to go really into the mechanics of change. For instance, IUCN can reach out to the EU-funded projects working on biodiversity and NBS to help them in defining the standard, EU standard for nature-based solutions. This is a practical activity because standards tend to play a big role in environmental policy. It's an area that is quite dry. It's not sexy, but it's very important to bring the change, because once a standard is there, that the economic model is workable, the deployment can happen much faster than if we have to reinvent the wheel at every stage. And also, I would like to give a message to the youth. I fully understand that there is a lassitude about the protest, but I can tell you that these have been extremely impactful. And so I'm grateful to the youth and their patience in going in the winter to ask more action on climate and biodiversity. And because they are pushing society to change, they are pushing the politicians to change. And it's not only the civil servants or the business or the lobbyists that have an impact. The youth also has an impact, and they are being listened to if they protest in mass.
Thank you. Thank you, and definitely also from the Biodiversity Plus side, we look very much forward to work together with IUCN and also with the national hubs. We think that is a very, very good entry point to have also impact on the ground. Then Alberto, do you want to say a few closing words?
Thank you very much. I have to say I'm delighted to be here, to have here all these discussions. It's very encouraging also for us from the IUCN Secretariat to hear all these different voices. We have been speaking about the transformative change, and this is what is the wording nowadays. That is not an easy change. That is, as the word says, transformative. So it's very, very complicated. Yesterday we had this discussion about agriculture, as I mentioned, and it's not easy to find the way forward, not only for agriculture, but for all of them. So I very much take the idea that you were saying also, Philippe, in terms of how we can contribute from IUCN, bringing some ideas about the mechanics of this change. This is the question, the how. I think we all agree that business as usual is not an option. Now the question is how to make it happen. So we have a number of tools. Yes, the MBS standard you mentioned. There are some others that are more specific, such as the green list for protected areas. We have the red list. We have a number of issues that can help. I think anyway, the most important that we have as IUCN is that we can bring together everybody. That's exactly what should be our power and what we should be using. And actually, this is the only way that a transformative change will really happen. So having the business here and having also the youth, I think that this is the way that we have to continue constructing this future. This is exactly IUCN at the end. We are working together to try to make nature better with all of the different stakeholders and all the different actors. So I can only thank everybody for being part of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will give the last word to Julia Testa. It's always good to give youth the last word.
Yes, so thanks a lot to all the speakers, and really, I really appreciate any time there is a remark made on the role of the youth and young people, because already these kind of remarks means a lot for young stakeholders and the youth. And yes, I also acknowledge that protests are part of the way we try to advocate for more ambitious goals. But I always like to mention that there is this other dimension more behind the screen that deals with more boring things, let's say, but tries to go at the root of the legal development and so on. And I really praise IUCN when it comes to the opportunity that we had with the IUCN Global Youth Summit. That was really an amazing, insightful event. And just as a final message that also summarize what the youth would want to see out of future biodiversity commitments, including the post-2020 framework, it's not really that we try to antagonize older generation or whatever has been done in the past as intrinsically wrong. What we really want to see is to see intergenerational equity put into practice. Fairness among generation is already part of the concept of sustainable development. So it's nothing new, but for the youth is really the key, because as you can imagine, new and current young generations will experience for the longest the consequences of choices that are made today or that are not made today. And at the same time, we will increasingly have the burden of action if such actions aren't taken now. So I know these demands, these perceptions are common to anyone, regardless of the generation that cares about the legal developments or biodiversity conservation and biodiversity in general. But for young professionals and youth, we have grown up with this sense of environmental disasters. This urgency is something we really picture in our lives. But also is an issue that we gained a lot of knowledge and sensitivity to because of these reasons. So it's really important for us to be involved and empowered to try to make a difference and also help other stakeholders that want to make a difference. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, and also, yeah, thanks to all of you for this very inspiring feedbacks. Then I just have a last question for the audience, and for that one I will go back to the Slido. So if my colleagues can put the Slido slide back on the screen. So as previously, you can enter just by taking a picture of the QR code, and then hopefully you will get directed to the question, or you can just go to slido.com and you enter the code #448580, and then you will see the question following today's discussion. What is one key element that you would like to see in the global biodiversity framework? So one key expectation, and I already see youth popping on the screen, so that's nice. Effective implementation, accountability, systemic change, we talked about that today as well. Biodiversity financing. Mindset change. It's a lot about, I also see global collaboration. Links to the Paris Agreement, so links to the different societal challenges. Systemic change is quite prominent. Corporate accountability as well. So maybe we can just leave it on the screen as I am closing the event. So first of all, I think today's discussions really showed that the IUCN World Conservation Congress will and already has an impact on investments and on nature conservation action on the ground. It was a crucial moment for Europe and beyond. And it would be good if we can indeed keep this momentum to re-energize the environmental community, but also to ensure engagement and accountability across society. And also, as mentioned in several presentations, we have several IUCN resolutions. We have a lot of tools and standards at hand that can also help to galvanize society and to scale up actions in terrestrial, freshwater and marine ecosystems. And several of the interventions have also pointed to the need for stronger collaboration with and also between EU institutes, industry, youth, and also civil society. And indeed, these partnerships will be key if we want the global biodiversity framework to be a framework for all, and also if we want the framework to safeguard biodiversity for future generations. So with this, a big thank you to all of you for joining today's event. Also, a big thanks to the members of the European Parliament, Ms. Mia-Petra Kampula-Natri, and also Ms. Catherine Chabot for kindly hosting today's events. And of course, also a big thanks to IUCN and to the European Parliament's Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development for kindly co-organizing this webinar today. So with this, I close today's event and I wish all of you a very happy end of the day. Thank you.